Hello and welcome to the Military History Club's Great Battle in 10 Minutes feature. Today I'm discussing the Battle of Arnhem that was fought from the 17th to the 26th of September 1944 between the British 1st Airborne Division and elements of the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions in Holland. It ended in a crushing German victory. The drama had begun at 11:30 on Sunday the 17th of September when the first of 32 Dakota transport planes took off from Saltby Airfield in Lincolnshire, carrying the 500 officers and men of Lieutenant Colonel John Frost's 2nd Parachute Battalion. They were part of a huge armada of 1,534 aircraft and 491 gliders that were carrying the first lift of more than 20,000 Allied troops, members of the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions and the British 1st Airborne Division. Their task as part of Operation Market Garden was to seize a series of river and canal crossings as far as Arnhem on the lower Rhine River, 64 miles behind enemy lines. They were to hold them until relieved by the tanks and infantry of Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks' British 30 Corps, who were to advance up a single road with Pol de Land floodplain on either side. Having crossed the Arnhem Bridge, hopefully within 24 to 48 hours, 30 Corps would occupy the nearby airfield at Deelen to allow the 52nd Air Landing Division to be flown in. The ultimate aim of the operation was to circumvent the Siegfried Line, surround the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, and shorten the end of the war. The job of the 1st Airborne Division was to capture one, but preferably all, of the 3 bridges over the River Rhine at Arnhem. The Great Road Bridge, a pontoon bridge, and a railway bridge. The original plan, known as Operation Comet, had allowed for coup de main parties to be landed beside all the major bridges, including Arnhem. But this option was removed from Market Garden because the gliders would be subjected to heavy anti-aircraft fire if they got too close to the targets. Instead, Major General Roy Urquhart, commanding the 1st Airborne Division, decided to use the 1st Air Landing Reconnaissance Squadron, mounted in jeeps armed with Vickers machine guns, to race ahead of the parachutists and capture the bridges. As well as Divisional HQ, 2 brigades would land on the first day. The 1st Parachute Brigade, whose task was to secure the bridges, and the 1st Air Landing Brigade, to protect the dropping and landing zones until the arrival of the 4th Parachute Brigade in the second lift on the afternoon of D+1, that is the 18th of September, when the brigade would form a perimeter defence line on the western outskirts of Arnhem. The 4th Parachute Brigade, meanwhile, would form the perimeter line on high ground to the north of the town. In the 3rd and final lift on D+2, the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade would land its heavy equipment in gliders north of the river and drop paratroopers on the south bank opposite the town, who would immediately cross the river and form the eastern perimeter. That, at least, was the plan. But it had a number of serious flaws. Drop and landing zones were only on the north side of the river and, at a distance of between 6 and 8 miles, too far from the bridge. The division was to be delivered in 3 lifts, which meant that the force assigned to capture and secure the bridge on the first day was not strong enough. Intelligence that veteran SS Panzer Divisions were refitting in the area was appallingly ignored, and Brigadier Lathbury's plan to get his men of the 1st Parachute Brigade to the bridge by 3 separate routes on day 1 meant that he needlessly dispersed the brigade's combat power precisely when it needed it most, in the first clashes with the still forming German defence. In the event, only Frost, his 2nd Parachute Battalion and some brigade troops, a total of 700 men, reached the north end of the bridge on day 1, using the most southerly of the 3 approach routes known as Lion. En route, the railway bridge was blown by the Germans as Frost's men approached, and the pontoon bridge was already out of use. The reconnaissance squadron and the other 2 parachute battalions, the 1st and 3rd, were held up by SS Panzer troops who, reacting quickly to the news of the airborne landings, set up blocking lines that could and should have been avoided. Thereafter, the Germans brought in armoured reinforcements and it became impossible to reinforce the men at the bridge. Even so, Frost's men conducted a heroic defence against a vastly superior force of SS Panzer troops until they were finally overwhelmed in the early hours of Thursday, the 21st of September. By holding out for so long, Frost had given the relieving troops of 30 Corps enough time to reach him. But they failed to do so because the advance was too slow, and the US 82nd Airborne Division did not capture the road bridge at Nijmegen, the closest river crossing just 11 miles from Arnhem, until the afternoon of 20 September. There had been an opportunity to take the Nijmegen bridge on day one, when it was lightly guarded by just 19 SS troops. But it was not taken because Lieutenant General Boyd Browning, commanding the airborne operation, had ordered the US 82nd Airborne Division to secure first the Groesbeek Heights south of Nijmegen, and thereby protect 30 Corps' route of advance from a notional German counterattack launched from the Reichswald Forest in Germany. The 3-day delay in capturing the road bridge at Nijmegen was fatal to the success of the operation. Though they had linked up with the 82nd Airborne Division south of Nijmegen during the morning of the 19th, the leading tanks of 30 Corps were unable to cross the bridge until dusk was falling on the 20th. They should have pressed on to Arnhem, just 11 miles away. Instead, they were ordered to halt until infantry support, fuel and ammunition had been brought forward. Assuming strong anti-tank defences along the high embankments that carried the road between Arnhem and Nijmegen, Horrocks wanted to wait for the arrival of the 43rd Infantry Division, which had been ordered up from the rear. By the time he resumed his advance on the 21st of September, it was too late to save Frost and his men. More than half Frost's original garrison of 700 men had been killed or wounded, and most of the survivors captured. They had held the crossing for 3 days and 4 nights, much longer than the 48 hours planned, but it was not enough. Frost's 2nd Battalion, in particular, had paid the price for its obduracy. Of the 31 officers and 478 men who had landed at Arnhem, only 17 avoided capture. The battalion had ceased to exist. The rest of the division had made multiple attempts to reinforce Frost's force at the bridge from the 17th onwards, but without success. Instead, the remnants withdrew into a defensive position at Oosterbeek on the western outskirts of Arnhem, where they held out under constant attack until the night of the 25th and the 26th of September, when they were ferried back across the river. Of the 10,700 men who had been deployed on the North Bank, only 1,741 officers and men of the 1st Airborne Division, 422 glider pilots, and 160 members of the 1st Polish Parachute Brigade made it to safety. The total casualties were 1,485 killed, or died of their wounds, and 6,525, including wounded, taken prisoner. Dutch civilian deaths were 450, while a further 18,000 would die across Holland in the hungry winter that followed. The official German casualty figures for the whole of Market Garden were 3,300, including 1,100 dead. But the best recent account on the battle from the German perspective thinks that number is very much an underestimate, and in fact more than twice as many had died. German casualties at Arnhem alone may have been between 3,500 and 4,000, and the same again elsewhere. So what went wrong? There were problems with the radios during the battle. The decision-making by senior commanders, notably Lieutenant General Browning, Major General Urquhart and Brigadier Lathbury, were flawed. The American 82nd Airborne Division should, as already mentioned, have attempted to capture Nijmegen Bridge on day one, instead of concentrating on flank defence. And 30 Corps, the ground force tasked with reaching Arnhem Bridge within 48 hours, could have done with more dash, to say the least. And yet, in spite of all these mishaps and a flawed plan, the operation came perilously close to achieving all its objectives. On those grounds, and with the shortening of the war by several months at stake, it has to be seen, in the words of 30 Corps Commander Brian Horrocks, as a justified gamble. The last word on this epic battle should, however, come from the man who was given the division's toughest assignment, John Frost. People have grown so accustomed to talk about the failure at Arnhem, wrote the legendary parachutist, that they do not notice that it was the delay at Nijmegen and the subsequent failures elsewhere that brought the operation to an end. In other words, it was not doomed to failure and could have worked if everyone else had done what was expected of them. Thank you.